Well, I think we are live. Um, in original. Okay. Yeah, I do want to put the link in the Discord before we start.
I posted it.
Oh, you did? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, that takes care of that problem. Hello, everybody. All 0 people watching. Welcome to a live stream on the Anti-Philosopher channel. Yesterday, we were going to try to do a live stream on Jordan Peterson with our mutual friend Kohei, and then I realized you have to wait 24 hours for live streams to for your channel to be verified in order for you to live stream. So we did a live stream on Essential Salts, Keegan's channel, yesterday afternoon. And we will do the Peterson live stream in the near future, but we decided to do a live stream on Rave, the infamous Rave Dubin, because
Look,
we just have a
Matt,
lot of thoughts
I want
related.
to say no one talks anymore about ideas. But that's what I'm about. The battle of ideas.
Dave Rubin is about the battle of ideas. And he realized the radical left is destroying Western civilization, so he became a neoconservative, a Christian. Well, I guess a kind of, sort of, a religious person anyway.
Is he a neocon? He seems like he's becoming like almost a boomer con, because he's kind of a Q guy. Well, not like totally a Q guy, but he was big for Stop the Steal. Like, that's the thing, is like it's easy to kind of, because, okay, I guess, so to give some context, we were both just looking through a bunch of Dave Rubin videos, and I searched by oldest, and I realized that his channel is actually the same channel that he's had since he was on the Young Turks. And I didn't know that. I assumed he had gotten a different channel, because I had never watched Dave Rubin until after that. I mean, I knew he came from the Young Turks, but I had never watched that far back. And just digging through and watching the transformation was very funny. But I don't know. I forget where I was going with that, but it's just the sea of clickbaity titles and flashy clickbaity imagery that spans his whole career, even TYT. It kind of made me lament for the sorrow of mankind that this guy was considered part of anything intellectual.
Well, I guess the issue kind of comes in, really, to begin the conversation. Dave Rubin really doesn't. He's kind of like Trump in a way. He doesn't really have an ideology. I mean, he's hitched his wagon to the Republican Party, basically.
Right. He's probably very similar to Trump in that way, actually, of being probably just a narcissistic nihilist with no ideological commitment.
Yes. I actually don't. I don't know. I suppose I can't really answer the question, is he a neocon? I mean, I've watched a lot of Dave Rubin, but I don't know. He doesn't really talk too much about foreign policy.
Right.
But he's become a traditional conservative, I guess, at the very least, which is not the same thing.
Right. And that's how I thought of him. But I was just, that's kind of where I was going with that, is that, yeah, he, by embracing the Stop the Steal rhetoric and the, he said, what he tweeted out immediately after the election was, can we all admit coronavirus is like a hoax and get over it now that Biden won? So he seemed like he was going in just a traditional boomercon direction. But recently, it really is quite striking, having just looked over his whole career and where he started, that he didn't just go right. He went to, actually, as of late, the farthest right positions, Overton window of our discourse. He's as far right as you can get, basically, at this point in time. So that's kind of bizarre, honestly. And if I'm honest, I didn't see it coming.
I mean, I suppose it's not bizarre in a sense. I mean, I'm reminded. So when people kind of to name drop Noam Chomsky, because you always have to name drop Noam Chomsky when you're doing streams on news and politics. But people ask him about Leninism and Marxism and whatnot, and he's like, I think he specifically asked about the connection between kind of like Stalinist hacks becoming sort of neoconservative hacks. And he's like, well, the ideology is the same. It's just where power lies. It's an estimation of where power lies. and it's really completely unprincipled. So you can't really you can't say they have positions. I mean, you can't say they're really like they have a thought out worldview, at least a principled thought out worldview. And that's kind of the way I think about Dave Rubin. Really, he kind of started as spouting, kind of politically correct gibberish on the Young Turks. Um, and as a former Young Turks, or I mean, someone who used to watch the Young Turks a fair amount, I'm fairly familiar with their side of the things. And then he became someone like,
that
well,
he basically
oh,
wanted to be paid way too much for the amount of viewers he was taking in, is sort of their side of the story, and they got into an argument over financial issues primarily.
yeah. Well, I was going to talk a bit more about like Dave Rubin's political or ideological trajectory, what little there is, because like he when he left the Rubin Report originally, I guess I was fairly well. I think Rubin originally said it was fairly amicable, but it was just kind of like I don't feel like the left the left is no longer liberal.
Right.
Like I'm still on the left. I'm still a liberal. Um, and I'm really upholding the principles that I was originally upholding, on the Young Turks, minus the radical leftist stuff he said he believed. But then it became, well, no, I'm no longer actually of the left, because the left is just nothing but wokeism. The left is nothing but people whining about pronouns and complaining about certain words being offensive, you know, and so he's basically embraced he embraced that kind of maybe moderate conservatism, you could almost say. And then going to your point, he's now embraced the kind of Trumpist QAnon politics, which is at some level you could almost say isn't even conservative. It's just sort of, I don't know, where you'd put it on the spectrum. It's just kind of a conspiracy theory type mindset.
Yes, but it's a identification with a personality cult that is centered around, I don't know. I understand the ways in which Trump is an unorthodox, like, American conservative, but ultimately it's centered around a set of temperamentally right-wing ideas. Psychologically temperamentally right-wing ideas is the Trump personality cult. And that's what he became a part of. So I would classify that as going far right, in the same way that if somebody became part, like, so for example, I would consider someone to be an extremist on the Democrat side if they're like a K-Hive person and devotes all their time to arguing with people on Twitter about how awesome Kamala Harris, one of the most powerful politicians in the country, is, and defending one of those powerful politicians in the country. That kind of sycophantic behavior to power for somebody who, as we all know, was a very somewhat authoritarian figure in law enforcement in California, and couldn't even make it to Iowa in the primary. She's so unpopular. She was outpolled by Andrew Yang in her own state, and Andrew Yang, as much as I love him, did not do very well in the primary. So was a very low bar that she couldn't reach. So I don't know. So that's all to say, like, there are those sycophants on the left. There was just a big story that, like, the K-Hive was boosted by, like, a bot farm as well. So maybe there's not as many of those people as as there appear to be on Twitter. But I think it's the same psychology, because that's still oriented around, like, a set of, like, sort of like left cultural identifiers, right? Even if she as a candidate doesn't believe in anything economically left. And so that's, like, what we're really talking about with, like, just using those two examples of, like, a Trump plus personality cult, to the extent that there is a Harris personality cult. If you look at what they actually did in terms of governing, not very radical, but in terms of the cultural identifiers, it's taking a extreme definitive stance in the culture war in some sense. I feel like, and that's where Dave Rubin. So to tie this all back to Dave Rubin, him becoming part of the Trump cult actually makes perfect sense, because he's a culture war guy. and that's what he claims drove him out of the Democratic Party. But and this is kind of the thing I wanted to bring up with Dave Rubin, what I find so why he's destroying Western civilization, basically, is that he has correlated this leftist wokeism with any kind of economic leftism or economic populism.
Populist left politics, sort of.
Right, where he'll call Bernie Sanders, he'll talk about him in the same breath as like Ilhan Omar or AOC, who, I'm sorry, they've shown are more concerned with talking about cultural shit than they are with actually doing anything. Um, Now, I know they advocate for all the correct policy positions, but just in terms of their actual behavior, which we could talk into that, it's kind of a side thing. But he'll I don't know, or he'll talk about Bernie Sanders or just general left wing policy proposals like universal health care. He'll frame it in terms of this radical left wing movement that wants everything for free, and that's somehow related in with wanting to tear down old power structures. And it's basically just, it ends up being an argument that because there's Antifa or because a pink haired feminist got someone deplatformed, that's why we shouldn't have universal health care. There's no link between that at all, but that's what he does, is he muddies the waters on that. And that's like basically his function now, is to sheepdog people into the right by getting them hooked on culture war issues, and use that to push back against economic leftism.
Well, to tie that back into, or so I have to make a brief digression into kind of like Trump and Trumpism to kind of explore sort of Dave Rubin's attitude about or worldview. I guess the weird thing that when I think about Trump, like I think it's too simplistic if someone's like, oh well, he's just a fascist. Like people, that's what people, that's arguments. There are people who made those arguments, like you can't vote for Trump because if you do, fascism is going to overtake the United States. And of course, when you think of that, you think of Nazi Germany, Italy under Mussolini. But I guess if we're going to characterize Trump and his adherents, including Dave Rubin, as far right, it's a different kind of far right from, at least to some degree, from what we're used to. If you're like thinking about far right from a 20th century perspective,
sure.
Partly because a lot of it's wrapped up in culture war nonsense. So, and that kind of goes back to the conversation we had yesterday about like, are political labels meaningful? Because at some level, it's like you look at Trump, and he concerns me. He just doesn't concern me in the sense that he's Hitler, because he's not.
Right.
But he concerns me in other ways, and his
he's not even Bolsonaro.
Like
there's worse examples within our own hemisphere of fascists. So, but yeah, true.
I mean, Trump and his adherents concern me extremely. It's just not in that old-fashioned mindset. I don't know. I mean, I can think of, maybe I shouldn't go down this rabbit hole. I guess I was going to say, you could almost make a slight parallel, I guess, to say that like, if you look at Nazi Germany, or if you look at Germany in the 30s, Nazism, I suppose there was some, I wouldn't call it culture war really, but I guess there was some like something similar going on, kind of, sort of, or at least
I don't know. So interwar Germany, one of the things I remember reading about it that's really like haunted me is that apparently everyone was absolutely obsessed with true crime. And when I think about that, I'm like, that kind of haunts me because I know so many people who are obsessed with true crime. My wife loves true crime. Like, I love it to some extent. I listen to my fair share of like Last Podcast on the Left and stuff like that, and watch like, blah, blah, blah. But that always was weird to me. But if you think about that, that's kind of, I mean, so culture war is such a broad term. There's always a culture war to some extent, I guess you could say. Or culture is always like pushing some sort of force that is underlying it, some sort of set of desires or values or goals. um, and true crime, and like, so in the dramatized form in fiction, people call that propaganda. You know, uh, Law and Order SVU, for example, the whole Law and Order franchise. That presents a world where the institutions are functional. The police are committed to upholding the law. To the extent that they break the rules, it's by accident. Their intentions are always good, for example. Um, and so I don't know. There's something about reading a bunch of things about serial killers and crime and freaking out about that on a cultural level, having that be your boogeyman, that is very right wing and reactionary. And maybe that like foretold of what was going to happen in Germany or something like that. Um, but I also would just say the real problems plaguing Germany were economic more than anything. And similarly, that's, I mean, that's the cheap analysis people make of Trump, is that he offered the same thing in an economic downturn. Um, but you could say that it's not necessarily fascism.
Exactly.
People are open to any kind of change when there's an extreme sort of like economic circumstance. It's just maybe you could look at like what the culture war issues are of the day to predict maybe the direction that'll be most appealing. And I predicted, to at least the circle of friends I knew, I have no record of this, but as soon as Trump ran and it looked like it was going to be Trump versus Clinton, I was certain Trump was going to be president. Because I knew that's what America had an appetite for more than Clinton. And that, that was obvious to me. But because I think there was a strong revulsion at that time towards the culture war. And that's right when Dave Rubin came to prominence as well, by the way. That was when he got really, it was what, 2015, where he, right before that election, where the Sam Harris and Cenk Uygur incident happened, and Dave Rubin went rogue. He became the last liberal, the last true liberal, Dave Rubin.
Well, I guess I bring up, Nazi Germany, or I bring up Germany just before the rise of Nazism too, because I really want to think about, and maybe this is too grand of a topic for a live stream on Dave Rubin, but I kind of want to explore with you what Dave Rubin is kind of a sign of, either ideologically or culturally, because I think he, we can joke about Dave Rubin destroying Western civilization, but it's kind of like when people think Trump is the responsible for all the terrible things going on in the United States. He's a symptom. Trump was a symptom, or is a symptom of a broader problem. And I think it's the same for Dave Rubin. He didn't, create the situation. He just kind of rode the wave, of anti-wokeism and whatnot. That populist right, if you want to say that, reaction against the corporatism of neoliberal corporatism.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I was going to say he was at the right place at the right time. Like he left the Young Turks and started his own thing that was about how we need to transcend the old political divisions of left and right, because the right is stupid and the left has gone crazy. That was the perfect time to do that. And another thing too, just speaking of, like, I don't know, the reaction to Trump and the calling him a fascist and making that comparison. I remember when the Trump election happened, and I remember Dave Rubin came out and did just because it's kind of pretentious in a way, but like he'll call it a direct message if it's just a video of him talking. And then he'll even include one before the interviews. But this was just like a standalone direct message. I say it's pretentious because, Dave, you can just upload a video. You don't have to come up with a name for it. It's just a YouTube video. But whatever. He's like, all right, this is my direct message on the Trump election. And he basically says, to my liberal friends, don't worry. Like, don't freak out. We just have a difference of opinion. But that's what makes this country so great, is that we can have a peaceful transition of power, and someone you really disagree with can take power, but we've got the Constitution and this and that. And it's like, he was basically giving that sort of like a naive, classical liberal sort of realist position. of like, hey, the system works, we're all going to be fine, there's checks and balances, we have limited government. So don't be basically telling them don't freak out over Trump, calling him a fascist and all that. It's not a big deal. And then you contrast that to jumping on board with Stop the Steal, having the biggest meltdown possible that Trump lost, and saying it's the death of the republic, which he said numerous times in the past, couple months. This is the end. This is the death of the republic. That's what Joe Biden means. And it's so silly to see him become a hysterical lunatic,
A
like
doomsdayer.
when he like not 4 years before gave all the arguments for that I would say to Dave Rubin today. Like, not that I necessarily believe we have a limited government, the institutions work, but just from my personal experience, that most of the time my life hasn't changed that much based on who's president. Unfortunately to say. But
Well, you brought up I think this might be a good time to talk about that term classical liberal, because
mhm.
I mean, I at some level, like if we weren't in the current cultural, if the current cultural climate wasn't the way it was, I might tell people, I'm a classical liberal in the sense that I think a lot of my values come out of that tradition.
Mhm.
But the term now no longer means anything, or what it means is a conservative.
Right.
One of the Koch brothers, in an interview with Megyn Kelly, he was like, "I'm a classical liberal." I mean,
It's one
if
down,
one of
how
the
many
Koch
to go?
brothers,
One down, how many to go in the Koch brothers? Just how many heart attacks are we away from there being no more Koch brothers?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm
But
sorry. I don't want to celebrate the death of anyone except when it's a Koch brother. Um,
that's totally not going to get me demonetized. No, they don't get any
it's
money from
fine.
these
I would
videos
say,
anyway.
hey, fair and balanced. I'll celebrate George Soros's death along with you. I'll high five you for that. Um, I
But so
saw a
it's
video. Quick aside, I saw a video where Alex Jones had a sword and he was like, "Soros, you will not do this," and he like chops him in half in effigy.
yeah.
It's hilarious. So as long as you don't do that, you shouldn't get banned off YouTube.
Okay. Just don't be Alex Jones. I think I can accomplish that quite easily.
Don't be
Um,
as crazy as Alex Jones.
but I mean, it's like, I mean, Dave Rubin has when he calls himself, I don't even know if he does anymore. I think he's pretty much given that up as well. But when he called himself a classical liberal, I mean,
Mhm.
that's when you fully realize, like, oh, this guy has no principles. Everyone who calls himself a classical liberal doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. It's just a
Well,
label they're taking on because they think that Democrat is, Maoist or whatever, to
right.
steal a
Well,
Eric Weinstein
to
phrase.
interject actually in surprisingly, shockingly in favor of Dave Rubin for a second, that was actually the period where I don't know if I thought at that point that this guy is sold out and he has no principles. So I guess if you thought that then, you already perceived that. Kudos to you. But I could kind of see the logic in the moment, right? So I could imagine, because I'm also, full disclosure, I'm on the like anti woke, like the Chapo left style of things. So um that's sort of the thing, is like I realize you can deviate from a lot of the core cultural beliefs of the left and still not go down the road that Dave Rubin did. And so I didn't necessarily expect that he would do that when he made that change. And so when he was initially just sort of saying, like, I'm against all this cancel culture, but I'm trying to find some sort of center leftism, as much as I don't like center leftism, I kind of liked some of the people he had on as guests. And then he talked to a lot of libertarians. And if you're, a logic bro, libertarians can be very persuasive, because it's all, disconnected logic. They can make a very coherent argument that isn't actually sound, if that makes sense. And so I
As
thought
David Hume
maybe
said of Voltaire, the arguments are more brilliant than sound.
right. And that describes, I think, a lot of libertarian arguments. Some of them speak to our deepest intuitions, even, especially cultural intuitions as Americans. But so and as a or I'm a recovering libertarian myself. Um, you know, um,
I'm so sorry
I
that
tell
happened
people
to
it's
you.
not that I'm not a libertarian. I just am sober now. Once you're a libertarian, you can always start libertarianing again. But I'm just sober from it.
Well,
No,
you're immune from the
serious.
disease in a way that I'm not. So, since I
Right.
started by being a pretty party or someone who was more just totally in line with
Right.
whatever the
Easy.
Democrats said, no matter what.
That means you're
Yeah.
inoculated against that, though. Probably. I mean, of just being a complete, like, blue anon, as I call them. But yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just saying, like, I could see it was believable to me that you could go based on the whole woke thing into like, I'm going to explore more ideas and then discover, maybe I was just always more of a center left libertarian. And maybe I just really want to hold on to this word liberal, or something like that. I think it's when he started to have on, um, like Dennis Prager.
Mm.
That was when I was like, oh no, like, because I had seen the PragerU ads, as we all have. And even when I was like more libertarian leaning, I was like, this is fucking sophistry. This is gross. This is disgusting. And some of the issues that they cover, like, I forget the name of the YouTuber. Maybe we can put it in the description at the end, but there's a great video deconstructing a PragerU ad on like, talking about Great Britain and the British Empire and how, like, look, whatever your opinion is on that, like, PragerU just presents a whitewashed, completely bullshit version of it. That
I assume it was something about like the British Empire was a civilizing force, maybe, or I haven't actually seen
yeah,
this
they
video, so
spread
I'm just
democracy
guessing.
all over the world or something of that nature. The issue is that in making that argument, they like actively like deny certain like massacres actually happened, that did. And so it's like, dude, don't go around like denying massacres. That's your it's like that now you're just like acting like the Soviet Union, or like Nazi apologists today. Like, don't do that. If you embrace all the shit, all the horrible shit your ideology did, guess what? If you're a liberal, liberals have done a lot of fucked up shit in the past 70 to 80 years. um, Using that in the big L, liberal society, America as a society, and Europe, and even countries that are way more left liberal than we are, have participated openly. So,
Democracies
no
have
one's
gotten into a
clean,
lot of wars from the pretty much the beginning of democracy in ancient Greece to today, actually.
for sure.
And I say that as
Yeah,
someone who considers himself a small d Democrat.
right. No one's clean. Don't fucking whitewash history. Like, be honest. Don't fucking bowdlerize things. And that bothers me more than anything else, is when people lie about historical facts to make a fucking point. Um, because that's garbage. That doesn't belong in the discourse. And like PragerU, that's particularly troubling because they pay so much money to run like 5-minute pre-roll ads in front of every, political YouTube video that'll let them. So I don't know. So when he started talking to Dennis Prager, that was where I was like, oh, what is up with this guy? And then of course Kyle Kalinske has said that Dave Rubin only seemed interested in money and in his career. Young Turks have said that, so I'm willing to believe that that's probably his motive. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Well, another sign or another thing that really, well, this was later on, so I was already pretty I'd already kind of had it with Dave Rubin at this point. But when he when he started to talk to Jordan Peterson a lot, and when he went on tour with Jordan Peterson, then not only did he was he like embracing, just traditional conservative arguments. This was sort of I think, somewhat pre-QAnon, really. Then he began to adopt the West postmodernism is destroying Western civilization.
Right.
We have to have a belief in God, because that won't check, because if you don't have the belief in God, then that won't check the evil impulses in mankind. So then not only is he just parroting conservative talking points that you could hear better than you could hear people
You could hear
say.
anywhere.
He was, you can hear anywhere, and you can hear said better than Dave Rubin would say it. He's just parroting Jordan Peterson's talking points.
Well, and I think there's a reason why Dennis Prager told him live on air, please don't stop calling yourself a liberal. I love that you call yourself a liberal, and it's so helpful to me. And Dave Rubin is like, well, I can't, I don't do it to help you. And Prager was like, I know that, but like, it was one of those moments where he was kidding on the square, as they say. He's joking, ostensibly, but there was like there was a subtext of actual seriousness to it, of like kind of like, hey, what are you doing, man? Like, okay, so this is a dark thing that you and I might not entertain, but so that whole discussion that we had yesterday, that's on my Essential Salts YouTube channel, we asked whether political labels are meaningless. And I think maybe very brainy types like you and me, not to talk ourselves up too much, but whatever. I'm not saying we're the smartest people in the room. I'm just saying we like
People interested in these kinds of conversations.
We like ideas in the battle of
we're supporting the battle of ideas, unlike Dave Rubin.
But I think it can be a blind spot that we sometimes think that people in power who might be malevolent are actually smart enough to have had some of the same ideas that we have. And I think somebody like, Dave Rubin, I don't think he's like a genius, but I think he's at least of above average intelligence given what he's able to accomplish. And I think it's like there is a certain logic that you can run through in your head of saying, well, all these labels are kind of meaningless anyway. In a certain set of definitions, I could really be a liberal. And I think that's kind of the issue that maybe makes it interesting to me, the whole Dave Rubin phenomenon, is because you can almost see at every step how he might even believe his own bullshit. And I think he might actually be kind of hurt now that Joe Rogan and a couple other people have more or less indirectly said that guy is a fraud and I was a mistake to associate myself with him. I'm sure Sam Harris feels horrible about creating him to some extent as the first guest. And I just wonder if Dave Rubin actually is maybe like a little put off, that maybe he has convinced himself that all this is genuine. Like, I guess what I'm saying is there are people who are smart enough to deceive themselves unintentionally, if that makes sense.
Well, I suspect,
wise.
I suspect, and obviously I can't read his mind, so this is just kind of pure speculation, but I suspect it might have started out cynically, and then he just ended up, justifying it himself, or attempting to justify it to himself so much that he kind of forgot that maybe it did start subconsciously or unconsciously from a cynical perspective. I mean, I don't nowadays
that right-wing money.
Nowadays, I don't
pay those right-wing tax cut rates.
I mean, nowadays, if I were to have a conversation with Dave Rubin, I mean, I would believe that he believes what he's saying. I don't know if he always believed what he was saying, though. So I think it does go to your point. He's probably deceived himself, which I realize we can all do to one degree or another. He's just an extreme case, in my opinion.
Yeah. So you had found a clip. Do we want to maybe get onto that? Because I'm interested to see it.
We can do that, yeah.
Because you found a clip about. Could you read the title? Because it was an amazing title.
Yes. So it's a clip from a longer interview Dave Rubin gave with Nick Gillespie, the editor of Reason magazine, titled.
And neither of us have seen this, right?
No, I have not seen this either. I just found it randomly looking at Dave Rubin's channel.
I have not seen it.
And it's titled "Seeing This Will Turn Anyone into a Libertarian."
Or what does it say about social? It says like socialist. Wasn't there another like socialist conversion therapy, or what was it?
Yeah, that might have been the thumbnail in the video.
The thumbnail was something to the effect of "No socialist can watch this and not become libertarian."
Yeah, I don't have that thumbnail off the top of my head.
Okay.
But someone can go to his channel and look for that. But we thought this might be interesting.
Well, so yeah, just to say initially, how would I put this? I don't self-identify as a socialist, but I am completely self-aware that I have beliefs that any libertarian would say you are a socialist. So,
okay, Oh, here's the thumbnail.
You
Here,
know.
the thumbnail is how to flip a socialist.
How to flip. All right. So and I know you probably also have beliefs as well that are like, you know, for, well, I mean, you can define your own beliefs, but just tell me what I'm right. You know, redistributing wealth, robust social services, you know,
I mean, I'm
universalized
I'm not
healthcare.
really. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm not a liberal in the sense that Bill Clinton's a liberal. I'm not really even a liberal in the sense
Wait, aren't you in the DSA?
Unofficially.
Unofficially, okay.
I'm not even really a liberal in the Bernie Sanders type sense, or the AOC type sense. So that's really how I distinguish myself. I'm to the left of AOC and Bernie Sanders, which of course Dave Rubin would think is just complete insanity. And,
that's crazy.
I want a Stalinist. I'm basically a Stalinist in the eyes of someone like Dave Rubin. But
Bernie, well, I mean, Dave Rubin would probably consider most of the EU to be like extremely communist countries. So
Bolshevik Bernie, as Sean Hannity puts it.
Right. So that, all that being said, we have someone sympathetic to democratic socialism, or both of us are sympathetic to social democracies, or we at least see the argument.
Yes.
And generally think that's the direction the country should go. Why don't we see if this video will flip us into libertarians?
Will do. So let me see if this works.
I've already been a libertarian, so I don't know. I'm very doubtful that maybe I'll go back.
It might not make you a libertarian. Are you able to see the screen?
I see like an infinite regress into. Okay, yeah, there we go.
You'll let me play a little bit to see if the audio comes through. I hope the audio is coming through to the one person listening. Can you hear that?
No. Are we able to?
I think there's a way. Let's see. I should be able to share audio somehow. Let me unshare this for 1 second.
Well, and while you're working on that, I can read the quote that I found from Dave Rubin's book.
Share audio. Okay, I figured it out.
Oh, you found it? Okay, never mind. Okay. We'll
yeah.
Save that for later. I just didn't want to have to airspace.
Okay, there's the infinite regress again. And this is, does that work?
I think in general, the government is...
Okay. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, or lady or gentlemen, we will see if we are changed into libertarians simply by watching this one video. Okay. And we can,
and I may ask you to pause it.
Yeah, I was about to say, either of us can ask, or you can ask to pause it to comment, or I'll pause it to comment. Okay. And we'll go from there.
I think in general, the government is not good at what it does. It's either incompetent or ineffective or inefficient, or it's kind of villainous. One of the reasons you would ask, how did I become a libertarian? And part of it is after I graduated college and before I got in the lucrative teen mag business, I wrote for a bunch of newspapers in New Jersey. I was a reporter, and I would always have to go to planning board meetings. And if you want to turn people...
Wait, can I just say, I don't think anyone, well, unless you're like, I mean, I guess you're on the extremes, I guess, of certain ideas. I mean, if you're like a Stalinist maybe, or if you're like a hack for the Democratic or Republican Party. Well, I don't even know if, I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't know if anyone really believes the government's not corrupt or inefficient, or it's almost like the point that everybody believes, even if some people don't act on it. Like, I suppose someone might say, well, Nancy Pelosi doesn't act on that, but does she really believe? I don't know. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Or I just feel like that's kind of the point. That's kind of a point that's like too, that's so like obvious that it's, and I feel that like libertarians say these things, they're just so, I guess I'm on the attack already, and we're only 27 seconds in. But
right. Let it play more. There's a feedback or an echo of what I'm saying when you share audio.
Oh, there is.
I guess if I'm in interject, you would just mute. I don't know.
Okay, I should be able to. I can mute.
We'll figure it out.
Alrighty. But what I'm basically just to wrap up, I was just trying to say that the point that government's inefficient or malevolent. I think everyone with a couple brain cells believes that.
People into libertarians, like just busload school kids, bus school kids to planning board meetings where people, just the people in charge just rail against anybody who had the temerity to like improve their land, or their house without getting the right permits. And half of the cases I saw, like people didn't even know, like, oh, I needed to go to the city council to put up a fence or like to, make my house better. It's like, screw you.
Do you find that there's any meaningful distinction between classical liberal and libertarian at this point?
I don't know, and when I started at Reason, we were kind of like, some people were talking about, we need to take the word liberal back, because in the 19th century and really starting in the 17th century, liberal meant that you believed that people should have more, freedom to decide what matters in their own life. And it was, it was a new kind of position that came
Take it
in
back
political
from
philosophy
19th century.
after, killing the king and beheading.
I mean, I agree with that to some extent, but I mean, I don't agree with it in the sense that Dave Rubin and Nick Gillespie are saying it.
Well. So also.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah. So. I guess the issue for me. Oh man, I can still hear that feedback. Oh, that's strange. Maybe I wonder if it's going out over the air. Are you hearing it?
I don't hear any feedback. No.
Okay. Hold on. Okay. Let's see here.
I hear
I
something.
don't know what on my end.
I heard some feedback just there.
Maybe. Let's see. You can just rejoin. Or
You can try that. The link should still be the same, I think. I hope.
yeah. Okay.
Well, so we're gonna wait for Keegan Essential Salts. Sorry. Oh, here, there he is. Right back in. Yeah, you didn't make me entertain this one person for more than like 10 seconds. Do you hearing? Is that any better? Worse?
Yeah, I can still hear it. It's
That's
really
weird.
strange. It started after you started sharing audio.
That might be. Maybe I'm doing. Well, I don't know. Is it because I'm using headphones? Maybe, I don't know. Should I try it without the headphones?
I would think the headphones would help prevent that. Very strange.
Well, do you want to try to continue on, or should we not? Maybe should we try not do the screen share thing? I have no preference.
We could just run the video and react to it at the end. Maybe turn off the sharing at the end until we have a better fix later.
Yeah. You mean after? Yeah. Alrighty. I'll mute myself as well.
beheading Charles I, and you had this brief flowering of liberal political philosophy, which, of course, in the immediate aftermath, and this is worth thinking about, Oliver Cromwell led a successful civil war and revolution, kills a king. One of the first times that had happened, certainly in British history, where people in the name of of enfranchisement of everybody or many people chop off the king and replace him with a commonwealth, with a republic. Within a couple of years, Cromwell was placing his son as the next leader. Things went bad pretty quickly. By the end of the 17th century, things were better. But people were saying, we should reclaim liberal because it's our word first. And then we came up with libertarian. Friedrich Hayek famously said libertarian is a bullshit term. It's not a good descriptor. I don't know if there's a difference between classical liberal and libertarian. It seems to me to come down to that a lot of people who are more kind of conservative in their personal lives and personal choices, but are libertarian, call themselves classical liberal. It may be also that a number of libertarians, and this bothers me in a way that I get into trouble with libertarians, over the past quarter century, a lot of libertarians actually have drifted into anarchism, and they toggle back and forth between saying, like, I'm a libertarian because I don't believe in any government, which is not libertarianism as I understand it, it's anarchism. And so I'm good with libertarian. I don't know, that there is a strong functional difference between a classical liberal and a libertarian, because I think we both believe in some government should be strictly limited, should be much smaller than what we do. And everything government does, in my view, and I think liberals agree with this generally, classical liberals, it should be done in a way to facilitate people being able to participate more fully in society. And it's not about punishing people for being successful, for being rich, for being good looking, for being talented. It's more about how do we raise up the people who need help. That's the function of government, along with, keeping our borders safe.
By the way, for the record, I actually don't think there's a really meaningful distinction anymore. The only reason I even asked the question is because for me, as someone that wrote a book defending classical liberalism, for me to keep going out there and saying I'm a liberal, or for Bill Maher even at this point to keep saying I'm a liberal, it's become so confusing that I've always said from the beginning, I don't mind if someone calls me a libertarian. I don't.
Good. Yeah, and and we're going through these phases. You recall back in the 80s, and in 1988, George H.W. Bush was able to, get a rise.
If I was a libertarian,
I think that was
good to be identified with Dave Rubin.
Mike Dukakis, the L word, and stuff like that. And the idea that liberal had become polluted, and liberal has faded. I mean, because Democrats either say I'm a Democrat or I'm a progressive. And I think to the extent that, Democrats, there's a lot of centrist people in the country. I think, 60% of people probably, or certainly 40% of people are roughly in the middle. And I think there's a lot of classical liberal libertarian belief there. They believe in leaving people alone and, kind of fiscal responsibility, fiscal conservatism, social liberalism. But the left and the Democratic Party, to the extent it gets captured by progressives, it's going to leave a lot more people looking towards the center and towards kind of liberal, classical liberal libertarian positions.
I keep saying it. I think maybe it's nuts, but what you just described there of sort of the live and let live attitude, I think that it's probably, I honestly believe this, if people could really understand the issues clearly and not get lost in the show, I really believe that's probably like 80% of the country. That may sound nuts, but I think it is. I'm curious though, because you mentioned the ANCAP thing, and I'm sure you know Michael Malice, and I love having him on the show. I think he's a great, anarchist thinker. I love intellectually that exercise of like how far we can do that thing to end up in Mad Max. What is like the sort of line for you where it's like, no, that's too far?
It's for me, it's more like I believe in, and this is popular among kind of libertarians, I believe in transhumanism and life extension and longevity. So I'm hopeful that I'm going to live to be like 200 years old. I doubt it, but, a guy can hope, right? And
they're working on it. They're working on it.
Even if I live to be 200, I just don't have the time to like start arguing about everything about, okay, this is how we get the government out of this and this and this. And like, I'm in favor of that direction. I think in general, the government is not good at what it does. It's either incompetent or ineffective or inefficient, or it's kind of villainous. One of the reasons you would ask, well, how did I become a libertarian? And part of it is after I graduated college and before I got in the lucrative teen mag business, I wrote for a bunch of newspapers in New Jersey. I was a reporter, and I would always have to go to planning board meetings. And if you want to turn people into libertarians, just busload bus school kids to planning board meetings where people, just the people in charge just rail against anybody who had the temerity to improve their land, or their house without getting the right permits. And half of the cases I saw, people didn't even know, oh, I needed to go to the city council to put up a fence or to, make my house better. It's screw you. But, in any case, I don't feel a need to have a philosophical discussion about everything. I like the idea that in general, the government should be doing less. And what it should be doing, it should be competent at. It should be coming up with good solutions. And that's why I like stuff like school choice, where, if you let, most school funding is done at the local and state level. If you took all of the money that a state or a school district spends per student and just gave it to the parents and said, okay, you can use this wherever you want. You can go to the public school or you can find a private school. You can teach your kid at home. To me, that's a win. Because it would allow people more freedom and more autonomy. To an ANCAP, I'm the problem because I'm not saying, it's got to be like rock and roll high school. You got to blow up Vince Lombardi High at the end, and it's got to be on fire. Otherwise, you're not a real libertarian. And I'm like, yeah, okay. It's just I've only got 200 years, man. Only got 200 years.
Yeah, or you could be debating with Elizabeth Warren, who doesn't want school choice but sends her kids to private school.
No. Well, this is one of the things that I hope the past year, and I don't, and we're coming out of it. Everybody's getting vaccinated, and and the rush to vaccination. By the way, this is a great libertarian win. Where it's and this is something good that Donald Trump did. He said, what? Well, obviously, the government isn't going to come up with these vaccines, so we're going to give, what seems like a lot of money, several $1 billion to, companies to develop vaccines, compared to the trillions of dollars that we have spent on COVID relief that is, mostly going down the toilet somewhere. It's a real bargain.
What the fuck?
That's a kind of libertarian solution where it's okay, we're going to incentivize people to do something that's for the public good.
We should fuck this shit.
So there was Dave. Well, I guess so. Dave Rubin's a libertarian now. So case in point, he just keeps on taking these labels on, or he keeps on taking these labels with no real end goal in the to be seen as far as I can tell. Did you were you convinced of libertarianism? Are you now a libertarian rather than a radical leftist?
I was surprised at how there were almost zero arguments in that whole video. And so what that video, so reacting to any of the crap in it, I almost just think it just proves that he's making brain dead clickbait. Because Jesus, man, there was nothing in that video of substance at all from either Nick Gillespie or Dave Rubin.
There's one thing I could comment on.
The closest thing to a point of substance was the government's inefficient at things and giving you licenses, and you have to pay taxes for all that, and it sucks. It's that's not a complaint again. That's not an argument for, unrestrained Gilded Age capitalism. I'm sorry. It's not an argument.
Well, the only thing I can really comment on in terms of that video. All right, so apparently Nick Gillespie is I guess you would say a minarchist, but at some level, my hostility towards minarchists is akin to my hostility towards liberals, in the sense that they're both groups are basically trying to have it both ways. At some level, I don't know. I don't really at some level. Well, I respect the people who go all the way and say, I respect the ANCAPs more than I respect the minarchists.
Well, the minarchists, just like the center-left liberals, are really just some permutation of the status quo.
Exactly.
Now, I understand that minarchists would say that our system is nothing like a minarchist system, and I get that. What I am saying is that regardless of what you think about the current system, it's an outgrowth of liberal principles upon which the society was based that have been around, as they talked about, since the 17 and 1800s. They really do go back that far in British society. And, the idea of extreme libertarianism, you could argue, already happened in American society. In the Gilded Age, as I mentioned, and so it's no surprise why they are correlated with the conservatives, because they want to get back to the good old days. But the thing is, the reason why all those things in city government require permits and fines and taxes, if you want to pay it, and fines if you don't want to, are for very good reasons. And it's the same reason that, I guess we won't play the clip because of the problems earlier, but like the reasons why Joe Rogan chastised Dave Rubin. No,
about building codes. You can't just allow architects to do anything they want to, because they'll make buildings which will collapse pretty quickly, so that you have to pay them to make more buildings. Basically, it is
right. Well, and that's what, if you notice, that's basically what Nick Gillespie was arguing. Like, oh, would people want to put up an addition in their home and they find out they have to get all these licenses and permits and pay all these fees? And it's like, yeah, that's part of that system. And look, I get it. There are some counties. So my parents are buying. They've bought a plot of land in a very small county in Texas, or a county in Texas in a very small town in a rural county, and there are no building codes in that town. You can build whatever you want on your land. That's fine. More power to them on the local level. But the reason why we can't do that in the city is because, like, a fire hazard in the city doesn't just affect you, it affects everybody. And it's like, that's where their libertarian, brain disease prevents them from seeing reality, because they have to see everything as just a series of individual choices, or the whole ideology falls apart. Because if you acknowledge, well, all those individual choices in aggregate of everyone in the community can affect everyone else, and if you build these, buildings that have lead paint in them, or that are easily flammable, or where the roof is going to collapse, like, you're doing damage beyond just like defrauding that one person that can be recompensed in court. You might kill someone, or you might, destroy a community. And so it's like that failure to like understand and that furthermore, as we always see, even though libertarians always say they're against this, the people who have the most money can just buy their way out of punishment. And they'll say, well, of course I'm against that. And it's like, I don't care if you're against that. If you have a system of money, people with more money will always get out of punishment. There's the famous saying, if the penalty for a crime is a fine, then that law only exists for the poor. So, and that's just reality. Like, you can't, that's a brute fact. If somebody has, makes $50,000 a year, or somebody makes, $10 million a year, that speeding ticket you give to the guy who makes $10 million a year doesn't fucking matter to him at all. And so, I don't know. They just have these naive ideas that you could have a society run by money, but that money will not give you unfair privileges that affect the rights of others. And it's like, whether you are like, well, I'm against that in principle, it will never work that way in practice. And it's about as stupid as communists saying, oh, well, our society will truly be egalitarian, in my view.
Well, to connect it back to Dave Rubin quickly, since he was the inspiration for this live stream. Please, Dave Rubin, come debate me and Keegan on my channel.
Debate Sam Cedar.
Or Sam Cedar, that's probably more likely. But like, I mean, when I watch a Dave Rubin clip, it's almost always him, and sometimes even his guests. They just say the most banal stuff they could think of. They just make statements that pretty much everybody, in human history would agree with. So it's like, leave people alone. It's like,
right.
I guess I know what he's trying to say, because I guess if he's a libertarian now, then he's saying like, well, universal healthcare is a infringement on my right, therefore you're not leaving me alone. But I mean, the idea that generally speaking, we want to create a society where people can kind of do their own thing. It's like, yeah, pretty much everybody believes that to some extent. So,
And
I mean,
he's invoking something that's very popular with a lot of people of wanting to be left alone by using the example of all those onerous building permits, right? So that's the example they're drawing up. But then he would say, yeah, universal health care doesn't leave me alone because they take my property to pay taxes for it. And so that's like the sleight of hand that Dave Rubin does, because it's actually not popular among Americans at this point. Most Americans don't see that as leaving them alone. Most Americans are saying, why don't we have a national health service like every other European country? And it is, I would believe, I know that polling data can't be trusted, but I would believe that a majority of Americans at this point want some sort of socialized medicine. But that's kind of what I'm saying. I don't think, like, to your point that they say it in the most banal way, they say things that everyone would agree with, but then when you follow the reasoning for what they're really arguing for, it's not shit that most people agree with. It's like crazy shit. Michael Malice believes in crazy shit. Like when Dave Rubin had on Stefan Molyneux to talk about how black people's brains are smaller than white people's brains, that's not widely popular with the populace, which he did do. And so, like, that's again why I would call him far right, just as an aside, because he entertained some of those ideas. But that's a whole nother thing. But yeah,
I mean, I don't know. Dave Rubin like strikes me really as someone who's trying to. I'm not trying. I hope I don't sound too banal, but Dave Rubin is the kind of person who's trying to engage with politics, he wants to do it with the least amount of effort. I really don't think, and I realize that might be how most people engage with politics. But I mean, on the other hand, I mean, most people don't have a platform. He does.
Right.
I would really expect him to do the legwork. But I really don't see where he's putting in his effort. I mean, I just see him.
Well, he's shacked up with the Trump crowd. So that's the right crowd. They'll stick with him as long as he's pro-Trump till the end.
That's fair. But I guess to expand on what I'm saying a bit, I mean, I just see him. I mean, I guess he must do a minimal amount of research, but he has someone on. He just asks them, the really the dumbest questions. There is such a thing as a dumb question, and then they just say something, and he's like, "Yeah, I agree with that." He's not really, he doesn't give his audience, and this goes to your point, maybe his audience really wouldn't want this, but he's not really giving his audience food for thought. He's not really giving his audience the ability to think critically. He's created this echo chamber. He's creating, all these videos is they're aimed at people who just want to hear everything they believe, spat back at them. Which really, I guess, kind of is a good way of describing the Trump crowd as a whole. Again, I realize that criticism could be said about many people on YouTube, about internet culture as a whole.
Right. But there is something particularly postmodern about somebody who does a whole channel about how we love the battle of ideas and the marketplace of ideas and freedom of speech and freedom of thought and stepping out of your bubble and your echo chamber, who then creates a bubble and an echo chamber where they talk about talking about ideas, but don't actually talk about ideas. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like there is something absurd for somebody who criticizes postmodernism. That's postmodern as fuck, man. Like the absurdity of it. That it's like, because when you were saying that, I was kind of thinking about it. It's like, that's all true. And then when you look at the actual content of what they're saying, if you can call it content, it's all platitudes about exploring ideas, which they never fucking do.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I think, I wouldn't say that like I view, Dave Rubin in a tragic sense, because he's not really a noble figure to be lamented. But I mean, I do think he could have, if he had like really kind of applied himself, he might have been able to do something worth. He might have been able to create a YouTube channel that would be worth watching. Because as you said earlier, I don't think he's stupid. But I guess he gave in to the laziness. He gave in to the, I just want to, I want to be a commentator, or at some level, kind of the Rush Limbaugh kind of a mindset of I just want to be an entertainer, and I'm just going to adopt these ideas because that they're like, it's edgy, it's controversial. Like, oh, I'm going to criticize this feminist because they said something ridiculous, or I'm going to, to just play into the culture war stuff we've been talking about, but which at the end of the day is not really a deep engagement with politics. I mean, I guess you could say it's a part of politics now, and you have to address it to that extent. But really, you could talk about politics at some level. You could talk about politics without really touching culture war stuff much at all, if you really wanted to. If you really wanted to talk about policy, that's not necessarily whether you want a statue, of Robert E. Lee torn down. Personally, I don't care about things like that.
Yeah. Well,
but Dave Rubin would say that, well, no, you're if you believe in that, my adherence to a sort of left-wing populist mindset is encouraging the people who say, no, you're, we need to tear down this racist statue. I'm repeating kind of what you said earlier, but he's not really willing to engage with the kind of the non-woke left. I mean, he sort of did in the beginning, I guess, when he talked to Sam Harris or Majid Nawaz.
He talked to a couple. Well, that's the thing is, like, initially, I think he would have said, I'm going to be on the non-woke left, right? But I think what he would have found, and maybe he did find this if he sincerely tried to do that there's not a whole lot of money there. And the market's relatively cornered by like a couple people, and you've got a very small self-selected audience. But what there is a huge market for in terms of like wooing people who have a lot of money, which the Koch brothers do fund Dave Rubin's show indirectly through Learn Liberty and other things he's partnered with. So I think that was more of the calculation, is that he saw where the money could come from. And it, that informed him more than anything, because I think, there's not, or he actually did. I mean, I don't know, man. This is the other problem. And maybe because we've been talking about doing a stream about Jordan Peterson, maybe we can get into this there. Maybe he really did become like a Peterson disciple, because Peterson, I think his big sin in our society, to put it in Christian terms, Peterson, is that he conflated those two things by saying that like social justice ideology is a form of Marxism, and that it's based on people who are just resentful and bitter, who are failures in society, who feel angry about that, so they want to take their revenge, and that's why they behave in this way. It's classic Nietzschean argument. I'm very familiar with it, as I know Nietzsche. It's just completely wrong, because the people who purvey the social justice ideology are from the richest and most powerful parts of society. The people who cynically weaponize identity politics, these are people who are in the top sectors of our professional class, and staffing presidential administrations and in major films and on all the major news networks except for Fox and the loony ones. It's like the cynical weaponization of identity politics happens on that level all the time, and it's disseminated from the top by people who are very successful and who often use it to distract from economic issues. And so that's just all to say, I think Peterson is pushing a certain kind of dogma about where this comes from, trying to conflate the two things. And I think that maybe that had the effect, because Dave Rubin, so I gave him the benefit of the doubt earlier, saying he's a smart. Peterson's like way under compared to Dave Rubin. For whatever you think about Peterson, Peterson's way smarter than Dave Rubin. Like, Dave Rubin's probably read, or we'll say, I bet you Jordan Peterson has done more reading on the toilet than David Rubin has done in his entire life. And so I think it's very easy for him to like influence Dave Rubin and kind of maybe that pushed him in that direction too. But it's always nice when your ideological development just happens to line up with where the money's coming from, isn't it?
Mm. Well, I don't know how much longer you want to go on, but I'll say it's
Yeah, we kind of killed it. Well, can I read this quote from Dave Rubin's book?
You can read the quote. I guess I'd want to give some closing thoughts. You can give your closing thoughts, and we'll end the stream.
Okay.
Or we can go back
I'll
a
just
little bit
read the
back and
quote.
forth on the
How
quote.
about this? How about this? Well, yeah, you can talk. I guess I would want to give you a chance to react to it. I was just going to say I could just read it as my closing thoughts without saying anything else.
Well, then I guess I'd like to give some closing thoughts myself if you want to read the quote.
Here,
as
I'll
your
just read the
closing
quote.
thoughts.
Okay. So this is just the first quote that came up on Goodreads from Don't Burn This Book by David Rubin. Quote, Exhibit A. I'm guessing you're no fan of socialism, which was a founding principle of the Nazi movement. The name Nazi is an acronym for the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which most of today's democratic socialists conveniently forget. Actually, that's an understatement. These people don't just overlook this truth, they've totally rewritten history on the matter. These days, Nazism gets associated with conservatism at the drop of a hat. But historically, it stems from the left. Adolf Hitler, an art-loving vegetarian who seized power by wooing voters away from Germany's Social Democrat and Communist parties. Italy's Benito Mussolini, raised on Karl Marx's Das Kapital before starting his career as a left-wing journalist and later implementing a deadly fascist regime. End quote. So, do you have any response to that?
Well, I mean, that really ties into, I guess, what I wanted to say. Because so I've kind of been aware of, politically aware, I guess you could say, since I was around middle school, which isn't to say much, of course. Obviously, middle schoolers aren't the most. I mean, their brain hasn't fully developed, although mine hasn't either because I'm 21. But point being, like around the middle school is when I started to get into politics, and of course, the older I've gotten, the more aware I've become, and the more fleshed out my thoughts have been. But I just find myself now in a position where I feel like I need to tune out all the noise and kind of go retreat into myself and go back to the basics, go back to, well, what are my values? What am I really trying to say? What do I really believe in this position, this policy, or this political position? Because I feel it's all become, culture war stuff. It's all become like, I mean, that's a perfect example of the, kind of the what political discourse is nowadays. It's like, oh, Hitler was on the left.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's not even an argument, really. It's just conjecture. I mean, so, like, I don't know. Dave Rubin just kind of, I think, exemplifies how terrible political discourse is in this country. Mm-hmm. And I don't really want to take part of that. I mean, I've had many conversations about the culture war stuff. I've watched many anti-woke YouTube videos in my time. I even found myself in, when I was watching those videos, I found myself kind of thinking about, or like maybe in the moment, maybe kind of taking on an idea, which in retrospect is, absurd or dangerous, but in the moment it was kind of put forward by this anti-SJW YouTuber, like, oh, that kind of made sense. But I'm just tired of all that. I really don't want to engage with all those kind of conversations anymore. I'm more interested in having the actual in-depth policy conversations.
Which Rubin
that's kind of my
does.
thoughts related to both the stream and the quote. Yes.
Yeah, I'll just get my final thoughts, I guess, that I guess what I would say is everyone knows David Rubin, raving dubiously Dave Rubin is a
Dave
grifter.
Rubin raves dubiously, I think we call the stream.
Everyone knows that he rants and raves rather dubiously on his channel, and everyone knows it from Joe Rogan to all the people who have pointed it out. But it's interesting the ways in which his career developed, and that it was a particular cultural inflection point, I guess, where culture war became very important. I think Trump rode that into the White House, and Dave Rubin, quite frankly, was a part of that. And we've seen him shift and seen that, okay, he doesn't really believe what he says, and he's done his best just to hold on to an audience now, here at kind of in the twilight of his career, and he's kind of tried to find his audience in the Trump people, because ultimately that's who he was allied with in the culture war. They're do or die. But I guess, I don't know. It just, if there's a lesson to take from it, when I take a step back, I guess it would be, how many of these other commentators are like this, or how many of them are at least susceptible to believing their own bullshit? Like Dave Rubin probably is. How many of them are spending less of their time actually reflecting and trying to discover those first principles that they believe or think about those tough policy things? And how much more time is spent on, instead of that, coming up with a clickbaity headline or how to market or how to get views and all that? And I guess that's just kind of a cliche thing to say at this point. Like, everyone knows about the adverse effects of social media, but I think maybe that's what David Rubin is the poster child of. That he's a guy who chased those clicks, right? Like, that's really what he did his whole career. And he is an example of what the algorithm does to you if you let the algorithm run your life, and that's your way of making money and being famous and being relevant. And that's what he did. And so those are just kind of my thoughts on Dave Rubin. And Hitler was left-wing thing. You can listen to Dan Carlin's podcast, where who everyone knows is the history guy, because he is the most popular history podcast, totally annihilates that whole idea. It's historically bankrupt. And so that's just my comment on the quote. But Dave Rubin, he's the guy who surfed the algorithm, really, is what I would say about him.
I mean, maybe at some point we should have a conversation on kind of like, well, I guess it could either be framed as a conversation on like leftist internet debate, or it could just be political or internet debate on politics in general. But that might be an interesting conversation. I know we've talked about having certain thoughts on like people such as Crystal Ball and Kyle Kalinske and whatnot.
I tend to agree a lot with what Matt Christman from Chapo Trap House tends to say about a lot of that a lot of online political debate is somewhat irrelevant and kind of I don't know, it's a game we're all playing, or a form of entertainment for a lot of people, and that really what even the people who are making money off of it, they're making money as entertainers more than anything else. And so looking at Dave Rubin from that light, like, it is, it's kind of hard when you actually believe in all this shit and you actually care and you actually think, like, it kind of sucks that Dave Rubin's like converting however many young men to think that building permits are tyranny, and that does suck. But if you can detach yourself from that, you could just look at Dave Rubin as like a performer and just consider it all like a shtick. This is when he was doing the liberal shtick. This is when he did the libertarian shtick. How well did he? Now he's doing the Trump guy shtick. Is that all it is, really? Maybe here's my David Rubin is the most honest expression of the YouTube entertainer. He has no ideology of his own, nothing inside of him. He only projects to the world what they want to see.
I'll go on his show, but I'm not gonna go to his wedding, because homosexuality is a sin against God. Checkmate, liberals.
Me, Ben Shapiro would get a wedding cake if he asked. Yeah, I don't know.
No, that's against my religion of Orthodox Judaism.
Of Judeo-Christian,
stupid Slovenian.
It's against my religion of Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yes. Alrighty. Well, would you like to plug your YouTube channel before we go?
Yeah, you can find it at if you look up Essential Salts. That's my channel. I did a bunch of content on political parties by Robert Michel's, which is a book, but mostly it's not a whole lot of political content other than a couple streams I've done with this guy or this guy. I forget, I'm like a mirror image on here. But yeah, so you can check that out if you want to hear more of this. Maybe I'll do more political podcasts in the future, but covering current events is so disgusting to me. I like these ideas conversations, but I sometimes like to talk about current events, but it's odd. I don't want to be. That's kind of why I haven't gotten into the politics thing. I really thought about doing, like, as far as like having a dedicated politics podcast, and I just kind of make whatever content I want to make, because like I know I would just have to cover current events all the time, and that's so depressing to me. So anyway, that's it. Essential Salts out.
Well, and of course, if you're watching this podcast, which nobody is right now, you know what my channel is. And if you also want to see, I do kind of a news politics / philosophy podcast called Beyond Talking Points with a friend of mine. So you can look for that on YouTube. So yeah, I think that's wraps it up for the day. Thank you for talking to me, Keegan, and we'll do this again soon.
Sounds good, man.